looking ahead to our trade deadline, I had a couple of questions just kind of based around that. Do you have a player or two in particular who you think could be a really impactful deadline pickup in fantasy hockey this year?
It really depends on, here's what I'll say. It depends on when your fantasy playoffs are. I did a fantasy schedule breakdown video where we kind of went over, there's basically two formats that I've seen. Some players have their playoffs week 22 to 24, and mine and a lot of others is 23 to 26, which is the last couple weeks of the playoffs. If your playoff format is week 22 to 24, the Boston Bruins have the most games. So maybe, one of those kind of guys, because Taylor Hall maybe becomes more valuable. DeBrusk is on IR right now. Maybe you could pick him up and stash him for those weeks. If you're in my playoff format and you're looking at week 23 to 26, Carolina, Detroit, and Colorado. And I think Colorado has the most games on off nights during that stretch. And then Carolina, Detroit, Chicago, and Florida, or Nashville, I believe, have the most volume of games during that stretch. So I would look at those teams and see if there's anybody on that team that works best in your format, whether it's a points league or a cats league. If you're looking to add shot volume, if you're looking to add power play goals or whatever, I would just take a look at the teams that are playing the most during your playoffs or down the stretch into your playoffs. And Colorado is one of those teams that's playing a lot now. And on top of that, they weren't very good in the first half, so they have to play really well down the stretch. So if you're asking for one player, I would say, I think he got hurt this morning or he's on IR or whatever, but Pablo Francouz was going to be a guy that I was looking at because if they're playing a lot of games and they have to use their backup, they still have to get into the playoffs. So they're going to be playing meaningful hockey down the stretch, and you're going to probably want him. You're getting excellent team exposure, and they're probably going to give him a ton of run support. So I did end up picking him up this morning at 10, and then I think at 12 he went on, I don't know if it's day-to-day or IR, so I'm a little pissed about that. But that would be one guy I'm looking at, and I have a couple of guys that have asked me about that. I have Lehkonen. If you have an opportunity to grab into Chushkin, those guys are getting power play time with Colorado, and if they have a really good schedule the week of your playoffs, that's going to make a difference.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you'll make a video for that once the week rolls around, right? And you'll give us a bunch of names, and I'll be cherry picking from that, trying to pick out the best players to pick up.
That was the problem with doing. I did the playoff schedule preview, but I couldn't give any players because it's like the trade deadline has to happen. We're still like 20, 30 games out. So it was sort of just looking at the matchups and trying to figure out the off nights and whatnot. And Colorado was really good for that. So that's why I mentioned them.
Right. And while we're talking about our trade deadline here, I just wanted to ask, because it is kind of far out and you don't know the specifics of every league, are there any candidates right now for players that you would consider buy low candidates in fantasy hockey that, is that still a thing this far into the season? Are there buy low candidates out there for you?
There are players who are typically second half players that I would normally consider a buy low. And the number one guy that comes to mind when I think of that is Kevin Fiala. But you're not really buying low. He's been excellent all year, which I did a whole video on that before the season started. It's crazy. He's basically like a 0.6 point per game guy. And then the second half rolls around and he's like 1.2 points per game and he's on fire. So I did a whole analysis video on the second half based on last year's data. So I would look at some of those guys that were, on that video. Guys like Jack Hughes, Tage Thompson were on that video. Those would be some targets. You're not going to buy low on them because they're obviously having great seasons, but typically some guys start slow. Mika Zibanejad is one of those guys that usually starts slow and picks it up in the second half. And he was, I think it was 2.5 years ago in the bubble, or right before the bubble. He just was on fire going down the stretch and ended up kind of redeeming himself because he started so slow and he ended up a point per game. But if there's a guy like that, now I know a lot of people are asking me about Huberdeau and whether or not he's a buy low, and I just the thing that I keep coming back to is it's just not his year. I've loved Huberdeau. I've had him pretty much every year for the last 3 or 4 years because I usually draft him in the fourth round and he gives me first, second round value. But now this year, you probably drafted him in the first or second round and he's terrible. So it's maybe next year's the year to go and grab him. I don't know if this is a buy low year for him, but I would look at guys who typically perform well in the second half, or, a team like Colorado, as I just mentioned, they were banged up to start the year. Maybe a guy like Bowen Byram with Makar out. Maybe you look at him as a potential buy low because he's very skilled. He's going to get power play time, and you can kind of take advantage of. He's at 55% right now, so you're still paying a little bit of a price to get him. He may not be available, but those kind of guys with a lot of skill who've been injured in the first half, maybe they come back and light it up. There's another guy I've been getting a lot of questions about is Duclair. Because he was really good last year, he's injured right now. You could maybe stash him and try to wait for him to come back. And the only thing I'd say about that is he has the same injury as Max Pacioretty. So the Achilles tendon, and Pacioretty came back. He looked really good for like 6 games and then right back out. And I had him, so I was really pissed about that. So just a warning to anybody out there thinking about Duclair. But those would be some of the things I would look for.